So here's the thing to note. This is not theory. This is not rhetoric. These types of partnerships are popping up authentically and with incredible outcomes related to how institutions and programs get better at working together, make more efficient uses of their resources, and actually attach people to the jobs in their community. And here's the kicker, also are responsible for creating jobs in their community. So when we do kind of a rewind historically, here's what these partnerships have done. They marry the very best of what we know works about economic cluster partnerships, like from the 80s and early 90s, you know, this idea of how do we get industry again to champion their own agenda. It very rarely had workforce and training as a core component, but they had some success factors, right? And they were pretty important. But marrying that with what is now decades of lessons learned around good sectoral training programs. So how many of you, and be honest, when you hear sector strategies, like you go, oh, grown, we've been doing this forever. Come on, really? How many of you, like, we've been doing this forever, right? Because you'd be right. You're right, you have. You have been doing demand-driven sectoral programs forever. But what we have learned is that it is very difficult when you just do a sectoral training program to sustain industry engagement at a deep level, a broad level, and a long-term level. So these partnerships have married the economic cluster lessons learned with the sectoral training program lessons learned, and what we get is not rocket science. It is quite simply a regional partnership. It is not statewide. It is not local. It is the right geographic scope for a labor market region. It will cross county lines. It will cross workforce area lines. It will cross community college district lines. It will cross the multitude of economic development organizations doing work, right? They are a partnership ultimately of businesses who work together with the array of public partners in their community to address shared workforce but other competitiveness needs as well. And the reason for the other competitiveness needs piece and why it is so important to not just go to a group of employers and say, what are your entry-level training needs? But instead go to a group of businesses and ask them, what's going on in your industry here? What's exciting and what's changing? And based on what's changing, what are the implications on what we all need to be doing together? I have worked with over 50 sector partnerships in the past 10 to 12 years. Only 2 of them have not had workforce as a top 3 issue. So when you ask a group of businesses to name their own agenda and start building solutions around it, workforce is always in the top issue. That's good, right? That's good for us when we want to get into plug and play mode. But if you ignore the access to capital issues, the infrastructure issues, the company-to-company networking issues, what you have done is removed the strongest element of sustainable industry engagement. Because businesses want more to chew on if you're going to get them in a room together. And you want to give them opportunities to chew on a lot of things. And here's the thing that I've noticed. Workforce might be their very top issue. Does it mean it's their early win and the first thing they get traction on? No, it's their messiest issue. So if you don't have supply chain mapping, access to capital, company-to-company networking as one of those top ones, you don't get an early win that gets them to gel together as a true partnership of businesses. When they gel together as a true partnership of business, Then they get into the messy stuff, and they're ready for it. And the messy stuff, as you know, is workforce, right? It's complex stuff, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of pieces. So this is something I have noticed about healthcare partnerships, manufacturing partnerships, transportation and logistics partnerships, tourism partnerships, name an industry, I'll find you a partnership. They all have workforce as a top issue, and they want very much to get into it. But they need other issues too to really build traction for their partnership. And this is an important process piece, and why it's so important to have our economic development partners at that table and ask the bigger question to the businesses. If you prefer a graphic depiction, here's one. So again, it's building the business table in your regional labor market of one industry. Successful regions have multiple operating next-gen industry partnerships up and running because they have multiple industries that really drive their regional economy, right? It's typically healthcare. It's typically advanced manufacturing, and then you have others. Agriculture, transportation, whatever it might be. Distinct industry partnerships, but with the similar array of community partners around that table becomes a sustainable infrastructure for operating going forward. And this is really important because what this is all about is building the sustainable infrastructure, really, of how we all coordinate together and mitigate the negative impact of us operating in silos toward the same critical industries. If it's not obvious, these are some of the most important operating principles. I like describing it as using and leveraging the pull of industry. They are a magnetic force when you get the critical mass of them built in your regional economy. That magnetic force truly acts as a way to pull the multiple programs out there operating in isolation together so that you are rowing in the same direction. This is a shared table. Building that table is not owned by any one organization. There's a convener, or sometimes a lead set of conveners. This convening role, I think, is best played when it's a co-convening situation. Oftentimes, I will see a community college pairing up with a chamber of commerce to be the leads on the manufacturing sector partnership, and all the others sitting around in plug-and-play mode, right? Or you will see a workforce board pairing up with a community-based organization to lead and really do the behind-the-scenes backbone support work of a good sector partnership. The best regions figure out how to spread the work around so that if one economic region has 5 operating sector partnerships, again, it's the same array of support partners around that table, but they're sharing the workload of who is the lead coordinator and convener. And that's a really important piece. These partnerships get businesses invested for the long haul because the ask is simply different. By asking businesses to design and implement their growth agenda in partnership with the rest of us, it is setting a very different set of expectations than what are your entry-level training needs? Can you approve this curriculum? Or even, we've gathered you here today to hear about your most pressing issues. What a nightmare. Have you done this before? Have you ever experienced this? What happens when you ask a group of businesses for their most pressing issues? You get them. Right? You get them. You get their most pressing issues and an expectation that you're going to go solve them. And that's a disaster, right? Because no organization, even the very best of education or workforce or economic development, can do that. And so these partnerships fundamentally change the ask. And it means everything for how businesses invest and co-invest and start to shift their learning curve. Because, by the way, we've trained them well. We've trained our employers to respond to us well. We have not done a good job training them to co-invest. We have a few examples, right? Some customized relationships with maybe one employer who really is co-investing, but we have not trained the mass to co-invest with us. And finally, the integrated response is critical because this is about trying to bring some method to the otherwise crazy, messy picture I displayed earlier. So how do we make sure we're plugging and playing and integrating appropriate responses from the appropriate support organizations in education and workforce and economic development, depending on the priorities that are coming out of that center table? And so when we look across the country, this is really important to note. None of these are a sector partnership, right? That's probably obvious, but I think important to point out. Your Workforce Development Board is 51% private sector. Maybe more, maybe less. But it's not a sector partnership. It's a board that advises on your workforce programs, and it's important. Your chambers, right? They represent multiple industries. They are a membership-based organization of lots of different businesses in a community. They are not a sector partnership. Your education advisory boards, your career pathway employer groups, anything related to those are not sector partnerships. Those are employer advisory groups that are being called together to advise on a very specific thing. They're important. They are not a sector partnership. So part of the reason I put all of these up here is to be very clear that these are all important things going on in your communities and your institutions that must continue. But if your community or region is not also building that shared table of manufacturers, that shared table of healthcare organizations, then these just continue. And we all continue to do our work in isolation. And so this is really important to consider, that none of this goes away, but if you're not also building your sector partnership, you're missing the boat. I will give you some examples of regions that have sector partnerships up and running to a point where many of their education advisory boards and committees have actually started to use the partnership as their regional advisory board. Because over the course of 3 years of a really strong manufacturing partnership, I'll give you an example of the Northern Colorado Manufacturing Partnership. You can Google it, NOCO Manufacturing. They discovered we have a lot of redundancies. Our community and technical colleges all have different advisory programs and employer groups. Our CTE, our workforce boards, many different organizations, and we're all convening smaller groups of manufacturers. But after 3 years of building NOCO, the Northern Colorado Manufacturing Partnership, what we get is that we have a strong table of over 200 manufacturers who are committed, who come every quarter in mass, and are getting to the detail of skills and training needs that our smaller advisory groups are not getting to. And so they had hard discussions across 2 different community colleges, 2 different workforce boards, and a whole array of workforce training programs and adult education. And they said, where do we now start reducing our redundancies? And they have. And they now have a quarterly regional manufacturing advisory meeting that everyone has access to. That's powerful. They went to the state and they said, is this okay? Because we're all federally mandated to have our advisory groups. Is this okay to use the NOCO Manufacturing Partnership as our regional shared advisory board? And the state said, go forth. What a great idea. So I give that as an example, as a potential vision, and a real example of how, again, these are all important. But over time, when a region and that incredible array of organizations starts to work together toward the pull of manufacturing or the pull of healthcare, et cetera, some powerful systems alignment pieces start to happen. These are just some of what we see coming out of next-gen sector partnerships. Absolutely on the education and training side, you get clear definition and resolution on key talent issues. You start seeing short-term and consortia training across multiple businesses, incumbent worker training to make sure entry-level workers are truly advancing. Work-based learning is always a big, big, big deal with these types of sector partnerships, because if you think about it, if you've got over 200 manufacturers actively participating and all saying, we need more hands-on experience, we need more hands-on experience, there's a pretty powerful opportunity to say, great, how do we do this at scale? Because all of these programs have been trying to place interns for years, and we're really hoping that you're going to place 10 this summer. But if you have the table, you can imagine that things like work-based learning and internships happen at a scale that would not otherwise. The non-training issues I find most exciting. Here's why. When you get companies to network together, one of the biggest and first things that happen is somebody says, I cannot recruit for these positions. It's killing me, right? Major hospitals, these positions. Or our retention rates at these occupations, usually the entry-level ones that you all are trying to place your people into, are horrendous. And what ends up happening is very quickly somebody says, you know, we actually don't have that problem at our hospital or our clinic. And everybody goes, tell us more. And in the past 2 years, almost every next-gen sector partnership meeting I have facilitated, we have had about 20 to 30 minutes of just simple shared best practices around retention. It is powerful because it is every one of these hospitals or clinics, healthcare as one example, leaning in and wanting to know more about how to make sure their workers are happy. Here's a great example. Well, last year we implemented this new thing where we let all of our nurses on the floor fill their own shift schedule, and we back out of it. And everybody goes, what are you talking about? Well, it was a real problem, and everybody was calling in sick, and there was this, and there was that. And what we realized is let's just empower them. Here's the shift schedule for the next 2 weeks. Go. Fill it. Well, I've got to pick up my kids from soccer, so I can't do that shift. And my husband has to work graveyard, so I can't do graveyard that week, but I could do it this week. This is actually kind of emotional stuff, because what you are getting at is an employer who has done things one way all the time saying, what if? What if we just simply changed our protocol for filling our shifts and empowered our nurses to make their own choices, and their retention and their sick days, everything changed. And everybody writes this down like crazy, right? And then you get 10 more examples of what these businesses are doing to empower their employees, to increase retention, to reduce sick days. What is it going to take? You got manufacturers doing the same. It is powerful stuff, and it's only because they're talking. And somebody created the space and the table and the right level of neutral facilitation to make that happen. So I put non-training outcomes, improved HR practices, assessment, local hire campaigns, career awareness campaign, aligning job descriptions with what's really required. These are things that happen that don't require a training program, but remove key bottlenecks in recruiting and retaining. And it's all because they talked and they gelled together. On the economic development side, it is incredibly powerful to give them the floor. Build in networking time. There are partnerships that are actually tracking what's coming out of business-to-business connections. Even in the first year of a partnership's life, did 2 businesses connect in a way that had them create a new product line? What happens when you create a new product line? You create jobs, like new jobs, not replacement jobs, right? New jobs, job growth. What happens when businesses connect about new markets? They jointly bid on bigger contracts together. That's job growth. So these types of partnerships, I will say again, marrying the best of what we've known from economic development and training, create the space for businesses to self-grow because they're connecting around commonalities. If you're sitting there thinking, because here's a big one, they're not going to share information, they're all going to be quiet, they're competitors, there's proprietary issues involved here. Let me invite you to consider that you all are generally more concerned with that than they are. If you're a successful business, do you think you go out and share your secrets? No, of course not, right? They know what to share and what not to share. And when you set the table and invite them to it, they will identify the set of pre-competitive issues and opportunities that they know will grow their business. And they do it very quickly. So this is an important piece, again, to consider when you think about the mental model of this, what comes out on the economic development side, as well as the education and training side. I'll skip over this a little bit. This, again, is a set of outcomes, most recently from the state of Colorado. So Colorado, about 4 or 5 years ago, took on this next-gen approach. They have 24 operating partnerships across their state. They have 7 manufacturing partnerships. They have 6 healthcare partnerships. And it's important that they have distinct partnerships because manufacturing in Fort Collins is very different than manufacturing in the Springs. And it's important to pay deference to that. And healthcare in the Metro Denver area is totally different than what you're going to find in the Eastern Plains. But the opportunity that Colorado has for any state folks in the room is that regularly they hear what the 7 healthcare partnerships are up to, what their priorities are, where they've had success, is there new curriculum that's coming out that can be shared, and same with manufacturing, and same with agriculture, and same with energy. So these results came out of a survey of performance indicators across the state of Colorado. And I'll just read some of them. Impact of partnership on job seekers and students. 71% of these partnerships increased student job seeker awareness. 62% experienced and can point to very specific alignment across different programs and educational institutions as a result of the partnership. And 67% resulted, this is in a year, in a 1-year period, with new or improved training and education programming as a result of the sector partnership. I wanted to put this up because this is, I said to myself that I needed a dozen, and I wanted to show different industries and different places, but also really that have emerged in the past just maybe 2 years. And so these are examples of partnerships that have emerged and have already come to some incredible early wins. I'll just give you a few examples. The Shasta Healthcare Partnership. Anybody here from Northern California? Great. So this is a very new partnership in Lassen and Modoc counties. And 2-county partnership of multiple healthcare organizations. And one of the most outstanding things I think about this partnership is they have connected with the prison system. And at first you say, well, why would they do this? They didn't expect to do this right away. But what they realized actually was that because they have some big prisons in the area, those prisons are healthcare providers in and of themselves, right? All healthcare has to happen inside. And so when they were putting together their invite list of healthcare organizations, they realized if we don't include the prison system as a healthcare organization around that center table, we are actually missing a very large proportion of our healthcare workers in our community. That's a very powerful example of simply in the very first steps of organizing and launching a partnership like this, an inroad that was made that would never have been made otherwise, with some powerful outcomes in terms of how do we make sure inside the prison system we're getting the skilled workers, and those workers are getting the training they need to serve their patients, the prisoners, best, but also the transfer of knowledge across and outside into other healthcare organizations, which there are key issues that cross those borders. The Olympic Construction Partnership. I live in Seattle, Washington, so this is my backyard. This is a construction partnership of about 40 small, mostly small with some really big heavy hitters, but mostly small construction and contracting companies. Their first thing was soft skills. Grown. Really, right? I mean, I'll be honest. Like, how many times do you sit in front of a group of businesses and you're 10 minutes into the conversation and we're back to kids today, and if they only showed up on time, and the tattoos and the piercings and the this and that, and you just go, I can't do anything with that, right? Like, what can I do with that? This partnership recognized that we cannot stay at this 30,000-foot level of soft skills. We need to understand precisely and with scenarios on the construction site what are the soft skills that are necessary. So if you tell me that, well, they need to be able to listen to their boss, what are you really talking about? We're talking about understanding a chain of command on the construction site. And so this partnership at one of their quarterly meetings turned it into a 2-hour mini focus group where they had 10 categories of soft skills, and the construction companies only weighed in on what it looks like to be successful around following a chain of command, or efficient thinking and efficient acting, which is really important on a construction site. And they gave specific examples, like don't load the wheelbarrow before you've pointed it in the right direction. Never would I have thought of that. Don't put the door on the house before you've painted it. And oh yeah, like I know from experience trying to do my own handiwork, terrible, right? Like, these are things that if you are in a classroom or working with job seekers who need to know soft skills on the construction site, isn't it going to be a heck of a lot more powerful to say, hey, here's an example of efficient thinking, you know? And what does it mean to have to be just ready for the elements, right? Well, in the Northwest, it means on a roof, you know, for 10 hours in the pouring rain. And there is no amount of equipment that's going to keep that out of your pores. Are you ready for this, you know? So it is a fascinating example of taking a long-standing issue that we just keep hammering at and turning it into a set of skill standards around soft skills, essential skills, on the construction site that was very powerful for adult education, community and technical colleges, some construction academies at the K through 12 level, CTE to immediately take and say, great, thank you. This we can use. This we can use. So I'm going to jump ahead just to 2 slides before we wrap up. I could talk forever, as I usually do. But this is something I wanted to put up and just have you think about it a little bit. This is, over the years, what we have winnowed down in terms of what works well and what doesn't when building these types of partnerships. And I want to highlight that. This is what works well for building authentic industry sector partnerships. Is there any one of these that makes you nervous? I'll highlight one that sometimes makes me nervous, and that's employer priorities first versus target populations first. And here's the thing to know. This is not telling you to stop focusing on your target populations. What this is telling you is what I started with this morning. If we are not fully understanding what the employer priorities truly are, we are doing a disservice to any target population that we are serving with the best of our intentions and with our passion and our overtime. Because if we do not understand what the employers need, and if we are not getting them to invest in those priorities with us, we are not going to serve our job seekers and students to a point where they get that finger hold and hopefully the advancement opportunities so that they are happy workers in a family-sustaining wage. There are other pieces up here to note. This is absolutely about forming and serving the group, the critical mass of companies. You will always need to do individual services to your businesses. That's in your scope of work, right? But this is about building the mass and the table. The other piece that I'll note based on this list is that there isn't something magic in the water in any of these places. These partnerships happen everywhere, from Maui to Tucson to Monroe, Louisiana, which I've spent a lot of time in lately. These partnerships happen because it's about people and relationships, it's about coalitions of the willing, and I'll say it again to tee up the workshop after this. It's about the process pieces and the very precise steps that must be taken to set up an authentic industry partnership that multiple programs and systems have access to. It does not happen overnight, but it can happen remarkably quickly if everyone is on the same page about the how and the who. I want to end with the bigger picture here. And these are some of the questions I want to answer for you. How do these types of partnerships connect to career pathway systems building? And do they impact the economic health of our region? More importantly, how do they fit together? This is a picture of career pathways that is not your traditional picture of career pathways. Traditionally, when you see a career pathway, you are looking at a program, a career pathway program. CNA, MA, LPN, RN, whatever it might be. And all the steps and educational requirements and skill sets needed along that path. This is a picture of what would truly be a career pathway system, which very few places in the country actually have. We are good at developing career pathway programs inside of our own institutions, and if we're extra good, we connect it maybe with one more, right? You can get adult education to work very closely and well with your workforce programs, or maybe a college, or maybe career tech ed. Different places and different communities will have different points of connection. But very few places actually achieve your K through 12, your adult education and career tech education, your community and technical colleges, and your universities working in some sort of symbiosis toward industry demand. And on the economic development side, here's another snapshot of what that cluster looks like. Every region has a cluster, an economic cluster. Even in today's global and virtually connected world, companies still concentrate in places because they share things. They share infrastructure, they share labor, they share technology, they share things that they must coalesce around. And that's an important foundational piece to these partnerships. And so when you think about the partnership that you are building, you are drawing on the businesses from your target clusters. Advanced manufacturing as an example, right? Healthcare and wellness as an example. And you are building that table directly from those businesses inside of that cluster in your region. But because the community support partners around that table are directly drawn from all of those institutions necessary to build a true career pathway system, and because they have access in listening mode and plug and play mode to that demand at critical mass, probably for the first time ever, we are seeing in regions these pieces all come together, where we have a career pathway system response dictated by the true demand and saturation points of a growing or thriving cluster in our region. And the appropriate connections are being made so that workers and job seekers get what they need to get access to the jobs in our target clusters. The synergies that happen are remarkable as partnerships evolve and get more mature. And what we are seeing in some regions is that these industry sector partnerships, these next-gen sector partnerships, are becoming the keystone to connect true career pathway systems building with jobs and economic growth in their regions. So hearkening back to that equation that has eluded us for years and decades of how do we, in harmony, make sure our economies regionally are stabilizing and growing, and we are connecting our people to the jobs in those economies. And so that truly is the opportunity with these types of next-gen sector partnerships. Not every sector partnership is created equal, which is why the steps and the process to building them are so essential. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I really appreciate it.